too. Yep. So yeah, let me know if you want those. Now, you know what we got to do, right? Warm up your hands, get them going, wake up. Where do we start? Before the flood, and all together now. And then we have the flood and the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the exodus from Egypt, wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest of Canaan, the judges, united kingdom, divided kingdom, Judah alone. Judah goes into captivity. A remnant returns from captivity. Period of biblical silence for 400 years. Life of Christ, early church, and letters to the Christians. And Mike isn't here, so I don't have to go like that. All right, now that we've done it, I get to pick one of you to come up here and do it by yourself. Devin, would you like... No. I joked about that Wednesday that I'd have one of you come up here and do it in front of the class, but I'm not going to make you, Yeah. But, it might make you a little bit more sympathetic to me, when I mess it up, you might, anyway. So we've been going through these 17 periods of Bible history. We covered and I'm hoping that this is kind of helping you to just see the big picture and be able to place in a little bit clearer of a way, when certain Bible stories happened, what was the context for those Bible stories? How does that deepen your understanding of those stories? And so, we start with before the flood, the story of creation, the way that God made everything that we know. And we see that there's these foundational principles about sin, and God created Adam, and he gave Adam a wife, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, someone made to help him, Eve, and then they turned away from God. It didn't take generations and generations. It seems like people are rebellious, right? So Adam and Eve turn away from God, and then God has mercy on them by not immediately striking them down. He sends them out of the garden, right? Adam and Eve have children. Cain and Abel, one of the first stories after the whole garden, ordeal story. Cain and Abel, the first murder. It didn't even take people generations in order to start killing each other, right? Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother Abel. And then we have these genealogies, right? Like the genealogy of Cain, and then the genealogy of Seth, the child that they have after Cain murders Abel. And it kind of shows you, as we look at those, that the descendants of Cain seem to be priding themselves on the achievements that they get, the inventions that they make. And then you have the genealogy of Seth that seems to be focused on godly things. It was in those days that people started to call on the name of the Lord. After the flood, the flood, we have the story about Noah, right? As the people multiplied on the earth, the genealogies, come to an end. As we get into Genesis chapter 6. And how are we looking? Mankind as a whole, what's going on? They're wicked? Yeah? Do you guys remember the way that God described it in Genesis 6? What kind of wicked were they? What did God say about their wickedness? Yeah, like all their thoughts were evil, right? Which tells you that God knows, one, that God knows everything people are thinking all the time. And so what does God choose to do? Well, he sends a flood, right? Yeah, he sends a flood. And there's only Noah who's righteous, right? He sends a flood and he destroys the world of the ungodly. Was God wrong to do that? No. How can God be wrong? Right? Okay. No, in fact, it kind of proves his righteousness, right? Like he is holy and able to judge. He's the one that gets to say, hey, you guys aren't living as you should. You are not doing good. And so God judges people. And what promise does God make after the flood? Okay, he's never going to flood the earth again. What do you think he's kind of getting across there? What's the idea behind that?
A little bit of comfort, but he did say not with water, but with fire, so it's still going to.
So as we continue reading in our Bibles, God does have a final expiration date in mind for the earth, right? But I think this is a really interesting idea. This is like, I think, the first covenant that we really see with God. And it's one of grace. He's deciding not to immediately destroy the wicked. That's basically what he's promising with the covenant of the rainbow. Is that he's no longer going to immediately, wipe people out because they're wicked. And we struggle with that now because we're like, how does God allow all the wickedness in the world? How does he allow all of this? Well, he didn't once upon a time. But in his grace, he now has patience. He now permits people to go astray. And that's what we see here. Any other thoughts or comments about that idea? All right. So after the flood, we have the scattering of the people. And we see that Noah and his sons, they came down upon a mountain, right? The ark landed on a mountain as the flood waters started to recede. And then they went down into the plain of Shinar. And then they started building up, and they built a tower for themselves, trying to say, let's make a name for ourselves, build a city that reaches up into the heavens, right? And from there, God confused their languages, and he dispersed the people. And that's where we get all the nations. And you see a genealogy after this event that records, where all the Canaanites came from. Where did the Israelites come from? What family does Abraham come from? And we see the groundwork being laid for a story that is going to be finished hundreds of years after this. And so the scattering of the people. Then we get the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I think this is really where a defined kind of story begins to emerge. Because we have this man Abraham who is called to do what? So he's supposed to leave his country, live as a wanderer in a foreign land, right? And along with that call comes promises that God makes to Abraham. And God promises Abraham that he'll have descendants, as many as the stars of the heaven, the sand on the seashore, and of course he's going to have a land, and he'll be a blessing to all nations through his seed, right? And these promises are going to define the rest of the story that we're looking at. And so Abraham has children eventually, and Isaac through his wife Sarah, and then Isaac has a son named Jacob. And there's whole stories to go along with these, but we're looking at the big picture. And then eventually Jacob has his sons, and they end up in Egypt through the story of Joseph, right? And by the end of this story with Joseph, they're living in Egypt for about 400 years, right? And the sons of Israel multiply, and then they are in bondage in Egypt. Now, what's interesting about this is that God called Abraham to be his, right? To leave his home and to live as a wanderer, and to come out from the people that he, lived with previously, I guess. And we see the same thing kind of happening here. is that now, instead of calling an individual, God is calling a people to come out from the land that they were born in. And with that comes some struggles. God is keeping his promise to Abraham and multiplying Israel, right? And God is going to keep his promise in giving Abraham's descendants a land to live in. And so he brings them up out of Egypt. But these people in Egypt do not know, really, very much about God. And that's the struggle that we're going to see. As they're delivered from Egypt, from the slavery that they experienced there, we're going to see that they are sentenced to wander in this wilderness in order to enter into Canaan land because they were unfaithful. They came to the border of Canaan and Kadesh Barnea. They rebelled against God, and God told them to wander. And throughout the wilderness, we see them butting heads against God all the while. And God is really, what he's doing in this wilderness is teaching them how to be his people, how to be his covenant people, how to keep the terms of a relationship between God and Israel, because they don't know nothing. I mean, they were just slaves living in Egypt a little while ago who maybe had some passed down stories about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But we see here that now they're getting a more defined look at God's character. And there's a struggle with learning God. And then we have the period of invasion and conquest. So now that those 40 years are up where they were wandering, they are now led into Canaan land to take this land. And there are 3 different campaigns, the central, the southern, and the northern campaigns that detail the lands that they conquered, the people that they defeated by the power of the Lord. This is mostly recorded in Joshua. However, as we turn the page over into Judges, we see that they didn't conquer all of the people that they were supposed to. Instead, they left some nations, and those nations turned the heart of Israel against God. And God gave them over into the hands of their enemies, the Philistines, the Ammonites. And then God gave them judges when Israel repented because they were afflicted by these other nations. So Judges is a very dark book. It shows the shortcomings of Israel, and also a divided Israel until the time of David, or of Saul, I mean. We talked about this a little bit in the last couple classes, but we looked at the period of the United Kingdom, Saul, David, and Solomon being the kings. And the Solomon Empire started to crack, right? And what was the cause of the splintering of the empire in the days of Solomon?
He was always not listening to God. His foreign wives.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, in Deuteronomy, I think it's 18 or 17, God says that a king shouldn't multiply wives for himself, right? Solomon is famous for doing exactly that, right? And he took foreign wives for himself, Egyptian wives and you know, everything you can think of, right? They turned his heart away from God, and God said, because of the promise that I made to your father David, I'm not going to rip the kingdom out of your hands in the days of your life, but God does separate the kingdom in the days of his son, Rehoboam. And that's where we get to the divided kingdom. And this period lasts for about 200 years until Israel is taken into captivity eventually. And I hesitated about whether I should include this chart because what I'm trying to avoid in all of this is that we're getting an overview of the Bible, and I don't want you guys to be like bogged down with all the numbers because numbers are hard. And I don't have any of this really memorized other than Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And I'm not expecting you guys to remember this, but if you're curious, this is the list of kings that existed in the time of the divided kingdom. And we see that in Israel here, The last king reigns up until the year 731. And we see kind of the end of Israel's time in 2 Kings 17. We're going to look at that in a little bit. But first, we're in Deuteronomy 28. Can somebody read verses 1 through 14 of Deuteronomy 28?
Now it shall be, if you will diligently obey the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments which I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you will obey the Lord your God. Blessed shall be in your city, and blessed shall be in the country. Blessed shall be the offspring of your body, and the produce of your ground, and the offspring of your beasts, the increase of your herd, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies to rise up against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and shall flee before you seven ways. The Lord will command the blessings upon you in your barns and in all that you put your hand to, and he will bless you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, as he swore to you, if you will keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. So all the people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity in the offspring of your body, and in the offspring of your beast, and in the produce of your ground, in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open for you his good storehouse, the heavens, to give rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hand, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord shall make you in the head and not the tail, and you only shall be above, and you shall not be underneath. If you will listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I charge you today, and observe them carefully. And do not turn aside from any of the words which I command you today, to the right or to the left, or to go after other gods to serve them.
So, is there a way that they would not be blessed if they followed God? I don't think so. Like this is a pretty comprehensive list of blessings. I can't really think of another way that God could have blessed them. But these are all promises that God is making. On what condition? If they followed him. And what does following him look like? What does that mean? What's that?
Obedience.
It means obedience? Yeah? What's that? Keep the law that he gave them. You know, in verse 14, if you do not turn aside from any of the words which I command you today to the right or to the left to go after other gods to serve them, he's saying don't deviate even a little bit from all the things that God is commanding them. Brenda.
And he wanted their love.
And he wanted their love.
He wanted their love, not just obedience, but
Yeah.
obedience from the heart.
Yeah, he wanted their love. He wanted them to love him. And that's really the only way to get real obedience, right? That's the only way to try your best to follow God is if you love him. Yeah. And so God promises to be with them and to bless them if they continue with him. And then after this section, comes another promise based on the same condition. And these promises are curses, right? In verse 15, "But it shall come about, if you do not obey the Lord your God, to observe and do all his commandments and his statutes, which I charge you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you." And then he basically mentions, cursed shall you be in the city, cursed shall you be in the country, cursed shall be your basket, your kneading bowl. If you've seen Mulan, there's that moment where the dragon says, "Dishonor on you, dishonor on your family." It's pretty much the same thing. The blessings that you received will be numerous if you stay with God. The curses that you receive, however, will be numerous if you disobey God. Is that unfair of God to say? No. He gives them the terms. He gives them, this is it. This is a warning. There's not going to be any surprise. If you turn away from God and all these bad things start happening to you, guess what? He made it abundantly clear what he expected, right? And so as you continue reading, God gives really, really detailed descriptions of what this curse will look like and what God's going to do to them if they disobey. And it's interesting because the section of the curses are like, it's like twice or three times as long as the section of blessings. But I think that's because God knows, in the end, what Israel's going to do. So he outlines exactly what is going to happen. But in verse 49 of Deuteronomy 28, it says, "The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth. As the eagle swoops down, a nation whose language you shall not understand. A nation of fierce countenance, who will have no respect for the old, nor show favor to the young. Moreover, it shall eat the offspring of your herd and the produce of your ground until you are destroyed. Who also leaves you no grain, new wine, or oil, nor the increase of your herd, or the young of your flock, until they have caused you to perish. It shall besiege you in all your towns until your high fortified walls, in which you trusted, come down throughout your land. And it shall besiege you in all your towns throughout your land, which the Lord your God has given you. Then you shall eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you, during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you. The man who is refined and very delicate among you shall be hostile toward his brother, and toward the wife he cherishes, and toward the rest of his children who remain, so that he will not give even one of them any of the flesh of his children which he will eat, since he has nothing else left, during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you in all your towns. The refined and delicate woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot on the ground for delicateness and refinement, shall be hostile toward the husband she cherishes, and toward her son and daughter, and toward her afterbirth which issues from her between her legs, and toward her children whom she bears. For she will eat them secretly for lack of anything else during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you in all your towns. If you are not careful to observe all the words of this law which are written in this book, to fear this honored and awesome name, the Lord your God, then the Lord will bring extraordinary plagues on you and your descendants, even severe and lasting plagues, and miserable and chronic sicknesses." So God is promising that if they're unfaithful to Him, there will be a nation that comes down, that swoops down on them like an eagle, right? A nation that they don't know the language of, that they never expected. And that nation is going to besiege them and is going to take their crops, is going to cause them to starve, right? So now turn to 2 Kings 17. Can somebody read verses 1 through 6 of 2 Kings 17?
In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea the son of Elah became the king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned 9 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel who were before him. Shalmaneser, king of Syria, came up against him, and Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute money. And the king of Assyria uncovered a conspiracy by Hoshea, where he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no tribute to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Now the king of Assyria went throughout all the land and went up to Samaria, besieged it for 3 years. And in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Syria, he took Samaria and carried Israel away to Syria. And he placed them in Halah and by the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of Medes.
Okay. So, what we see here is the end of the kingdom of Israel, and it ends really during the time of Hoshea. And what are we seeing here? What's the picture that's being painted?
Just what God said would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm not sneaky. You guys know what I'm trying to say, right? We're in Deuteronomy 28. We're looking at the curses that happened, that God promised would happen if they turned away from him. And now we're seeing exactly what God said would happen, right? It's funny how that works. When God says something, it's going to happen. And here we see Israel is being conquered and brutalized by the king of Assyria. How long was Samaria besieged? 3 years. Guys, what's a siege? Just let's start from there.
When they surround the city, and you can't get in or out to get food or water or
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So Samaria is the capital of Israel, and they would have had walls and gates to keep the city safe. Well, instead of breaking into those walls and defeating the people inside, an enemy nation could just camp around it and stop any food from entering or leaving the city and effectively starve all of the people inside of the city until they give up. And that's what a siege is. It's just a waiting game, right? Samaria lasted 3 years under a siege. If you were locked in your house, how long would you make it before having to go to Walmart or go shopping? I mean, some of us have stacked pantries. We got jars and jars and jars of food. You think you can make it 3 years? Maybe some of you. But we're talking about an entire city of people. 3 years. Supplies run low. And there are lots of stories about the things that happen during a siege. And in fact, in the days of Hezekiah, Jerusalem was sieged, and we see the kind of brutality that happened in that time, and the ways that, yes, cannibalism was seen, mothers eating their own children, exactly what was described in Deuteronomy 28. So that's what happened with Israel. And then we see a description of why this happened in 2 Kings 17. In verse 7 it says, "This came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods. They walked in the customs of the nations which the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel which they had introduced. The sons of Israel did things secretly, which were not right against the Lord their God. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set for themselves sacred pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they burned incense in all the high places, as the nations did, which the Lord had carried away to exile before them. And they did evil things, provoking the Lord. They served idols, concerning which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you through my servants, the prophets." However, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenant which he made with their fathers, and his warnings with which he warned them. They followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord had commanded them not to do like them. They forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made for themselves molten images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they made their sons and their daughters pass through the fire, and practiced divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them from his sight. None was left except the tribe of Judah. There's a lot of emphasis being placed here on the fact that they did not keep the Lord's commands, right? How many different ways can you say that? Well, in verse 9 it says, "The sons of Israel did things secretly which were not right against their Lord." You know, it's something to set up high places and to worship idols, to have household idols, and you know. But then there's another thing that they did things secretly against the Lord. What does that mean? What does that add to all of this?
They were trying to hide their evil.
Right. They were trying to hide it. They knew better. Yeah. Yeah, they knew better. The fact that they're trying to hide it points to the very fact that they know they shouldn't be doing it, right? This isn't just ignorance that's causing them to turn away from the Lord. No, they're hiding it. And so God does exactly what he promises. He removes them from his sight. And as you continue reading in verse 19, "Also Judah did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs which Israel had introduced. And the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel, and afflicted them and gave them into the hands of plunderers, until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drove Israel away from following the Lord, and made them commit a great sin. The sons of Israel walked in the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel from his sight, as he spoke through all his servants, the prophets. So Israel was carried away in exile from their own land into Assyria until this day." What effect was Israel having upon Judah?
Bad influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so even the sins and the idolatry that was introduced by Jeroboam, those remained, and those actually infected and started to influence Judah. And so we're going to see that in a little bit. As we talk about this period of Judah alone, Israel's no longer there. In fact, the king of Assyria then takes foreigners from a bunch of different nations, and then he introduces them into the land of Israel in order to kind of destroy the bloodline. You no longer know who's an Israelite and who's not. Everybody is marrying with foreigners, and so there's no longer any cultural identity. You know, there's no longer anything like that to try and keep them as God's people. And as we turn to the end of 2 Kings in chapter 24, it's not Assyria that ends up taking Judah into captivity. No. There we go. But it's the Chaldeans. It's the hand of the Babylonians that God ends up using to carry Judah into captivity. Now the promise is a little bit different for Israel. Israel is taken away, and then they are kind of dispersed, right? You don't see a return from Israel. However, the promise is a little bit different for Judah. They're going to go into captivity, and they're going to be conquered by Babylon. They're going to be there for 70 years. And then eventually God is going to allow a faithful remnant to return back and to live in Judah and to stay in Jerusalem. But in this period, we see the prophets of Daniel and Ezekiel. So, in 2 Kings chapter 24, in verse 8, there's this king Jehoiachin. And it says, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Enathan of Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. And at that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem. And the city came under siege, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and the captains and his officials. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried from there all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold that Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, just as the Lord had said. Then he led away into exile all Jerusalem, and all the captains, and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. He led Jehoiachin away into exile to Babylon. Also the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officials, and the leading men of the land, he led them away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. All the men of valor, 7,000, and the craftsmen and the smiths, 1,000, all strong and fit for war, and those the king of Babylon brought into exile to Babylon. So we see here the idea of an exile, right? It isn't the poorest of the people that Nebuchadnezzar wants, right? It isn't the poorest of the people that he's bringing into exile to live in Babylon. It's the healthy ones, right? The accomplished ones. And along in this list, I believe we will probably think about Daniel as we read through this. He was a young man who was very intelligent, and he was brought into Babylon. And you can read that story in the book of Daniel. And then Nebuchadnezzar just has free reign to do whatever he wants to Jerusalem. He makes Zedekiah king in the place of Jehoiachin. Zedekiah rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and then in chapter 25 we have another siege against Jerusalem. And then what happens to Zedekiah is even worse. After the siege, in verse 6, it says, they captured the king and brought him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and he passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with bronze fetters, and brought him to Babylon. You know, the idea there is that the last thing you see before your eyes are gouged out is the sight of your sons being murdered in front of you. Horrible. And then another wave of this plundering and exiles being taken away is begun in verse 8. On the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Even every great house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. So now we see that there's just a devastation that they don't come back from until this period of captivity, where the house of the Lord is burned down, the houses of everybody is torn down, as well as the walls. And we're going to be talking about a remnant returning from captivity in the next class, where in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, there's going to be a rebuilding after this period of captivity. So, tune in next time. All right, real quick before we end, one more round. What's the first one? Before the flood. The flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, Exodus from Egypt, covenant to Mount Sinai, wandering in the wilderness. Where did I get that one? Let me just add a new one there for you guys. Wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest of Canaan, the judges, united kingdom, divided kingdom, Judah alone. Judah goes into captivity. A remnant returns from captivity. 400 years of silence. The life of Christ. Early church and letters to the Christians. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. See you next week.